Wishing you peace on this Memorial Day, and delighted to have you with us on this holiday. Greeny and Laura are here. DJ is back to shoot some threes, and Tom Thibodeau is here to defend the indefensible, the coaching of Mike Budenholzer. We're gonna have, we're sort of having all our first fights here lately.
I know.
Tibbs and I are gonna have our first fight. We'll see how that goes, but let's start by getting up and going. We'll get up and go, run you around some of the events of the weekend in sports, and let's start in baseball, where the Yankees' 7-game win streak came to an end Sunday in KC. Royals walked it off. Whit Merrifield, an RBI single, bottom of 10. Yankees had rallied from 7-1 down to tie it. The Bombers still a 2-game lead over the Rays in the AL East. It was the first walk-off defeat of the Yankees season. And so the Yanks now at .654 winning percentage, second in the American League only to the Twins, who improved to a Major League best 36-16 with their 7-0 win over the White Sox yesterday. Twins have now won 6 straight and 11 of their last 12. Listen to this. They've outscored their opponents 105-44 in that span. Indy 500 on Sunday. Vive la France! Pole sitter Simon Pagenaud is your winner. He's the first French-born winner to win the Indy 500 since Gaston Chevrolet in 1920. DJ loves my pronunciation. Très bien.
Get it, Green.
And the first driver to win the race from the pole position since Elio Castroneves in 2009. To hockey, where the Stanley Cup Finals begin tonight in Boston. Bruins hosting the Cinderella St. Louis Blues. Blues had the worst record in hockey in January, able to sneak into the playoffs, and now have a chance to avenge their 1970 Stanley Cup Final defeat to the Bruins as they begin that best-of-7 series tonight. And all of that brings us back to the NBA, where the finals are now set after the Raptors finish off the Bucks in Game 6 on Saturday night, rallying from 15 down behind Kawhi Leonard, who finished with 27 points, 17 boards, 7 assists. It'll be the first trip to the NBA Finals in Toronto franchise history. And Kawhi Leonard, obviously, the overwhelming reason why. He became the third player in the last 25 years to lead his team in scoring and reach the NBA Finals in his first season with a team. You may recognize the other two. LeBron did it his first year in Miami, and Jason Kidd did it with the Nets in 2002. Worth pointing out, neither of those two, LeBron nor Kidd, that year wound up winning the championship. We will see if Kawhi is able to do that here as we get our first sort of crack at this. And I want to start with this, and Tibbs, we'll start with you as one who has been involved in putting together teams and organizations in the NBA. To me, the star of all of this is Masai Ujiri, who was the general manager of the Raptors. And to just call him the executive of the year, in my opinion, sells short what he accomplished. Bear in mind that a little less than a year ago, he fired the coach of the year and traded away the face of the franchise. And 11 months later, he looks like a genius.
Yeah, I think it was a major move by Masai, and it's calculated risk. I think he saw that the team he had went about as far as it could go in his eyes. It also coupled with LeBron leaving the East, so there was an opportunity there. I think he rolled the dice. There's a big gamble in this, and it's obviously paying off right now. But they gave up a lot. They gave up DeMar DeRozan. They gave up Pirtle, who was a terrific young player, and a first-round pick. But he's in a great position now. He's got 2 paths that he can go down. If Kawhi stays, obviously that's the best path for them. If he goes, they can move in a different direction and also start a rebuild. Right. And then they would make other roster adjustments. They're in a terrific position. I think he felt they were at the end of the rope with the team that he had.
Yeah, they could be starting a rebuild in as soon as a month, which is crazy to think about. But do you think Kawhi is going to stay in Toronto?
I don't think so. Win, lose, or draw, I think he leaves. I just think it's a better opportunity for him where he perceives to be going, and that's out west to the Los Angeles Clippers or the Los Angeles Lakers. And I just think, Toronto's a great city, and he did some great things there. Hopefully they get the job done and win the NBA Finals, but I think he's gone either way.
Now, let's analyze that for a minute, because when we say it's a better situation, at least he perceives it to be.
Yeah.
I understand there's no place like home, and he's a Southern California guy, and he just strikes you as the kind of person for whom that familiarity is important, right? That's just the kind of personality he seems to have. Having said that, it's easier to win in the East. Yeah. He's got a team in the NBA Finals, and they have a lot of good young pieces. So his best chance to win is probably to remain in Toronto, no?
Well, it depends on who goes with him. We've talked about for weeks on end how he's going to team up with Kevin Durant, or he's going to go with LeBron James in L.A. So what better way to go home to team up with two of the best players in the league.
Hold on one second, because I need to come back to you on this. And for those who don't know, I mean, DJ, you coached LeBron, you played with LeBron, you know him very well. And the conventional wisdom for the longest time now has been Kawhi's going to the Clippers, Kawhi's going to the Clippers. Just in the last week or so, suddenly we start hearing about, you know, the Tamperer-in-Chief and all this kind of stuff. Do you believe there is a real opportunity here for Kawhi to wind up with the Lakers and LeBron?
I think it does. And you know, the conspiracy theorists are out that LeBron flew to Philadelphia during the Toronto-Philly series to meet with Kawhi. And you know what? It's a great match. Kawhi, he's one of the best two-way players in the league. He can score the basketball. LeBron is a facilitator of the basketball, and it just works well together.
That's fascinating to me. And then I want to go back to the previous thing, Tibbs, but DJ just touched on it here. Let's make sure we explain this to everybody. They might win the championship. The Raptors, 2 weeks from now, could be holding up, you know, the trophy. They might be the champions. And then if Kawhi decides to go back to the Clippers, explain their moves. They could win the title and be in a full rebuild in the span of about 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I think Masai created this knowing that this would be a possibility. And so he has two great options. I think he's developed his young players. And if this does happen, they could go down a different path, and you'll probably see him move some of the older players on his roster. And if Kawhi stays, I do think when you look at Kawhi, I think if they should win it, if they do win it, and that could happen, it may be harder for him to leave. I think he won't make his decision until he has all the information that he needs. And then obviously he'll make the best decision for himself and his family. But he's got great options. DJ's working for LeBron.
I'm not working for LeBron. Let me ask you this question, Tibbs. Let me ask you this question. Toronto, LA.
Well, the one thing I would say about Kawhi, and he's talked about it often, he talks about the importance of winning. The West is a different animal. So I think that will factor into it as well. But in terms of if you're making a decision on weather and where DJ likes to hang out, maybe that way. But I think it'll be a basketball decision, and I think he'll go with the best chance that he feels he has to continue to win championships.
Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say that was a nice way of not fully answering DJ's
Yeah,
question.
he didn't answer.
We have a minute.
Full disclosure, I would say Doc Rivers, in the Clippers.
Exactly.
So
Okay, there it is.
Boom.
Breaking news.
Okay, that's interesting. So Doc Rivers and the Clippers with KD. I'm just making this up now because that's one of the if Kawhi goes to the Clippers right now by himself, and by himself is an unreasonable way to put it. The Clippers just took the Warriors 6 games in the first round of these playoffs as it was with Kevin Durant. But if it's Kawhi going there without another superstar going there, or going to the Lakers with LeBron James, I'm not sure which is necessarily the better situation. If he's teaming up with Kevin Durant with the Clippers, then forget it. KD barred the door. They're the favorites to win the championship starting immediately. But otherwise, you're better off playing with LeBron, and with no disrespect intended to your profession, no matter who the coach is, right? LeBron and Kawhi.
Come on, Greeny. Come on now.
I know how
You're attacking coaches today.
Come on now. I'm part of the coaching.
Wait, everyone.
I know how important rolling the balls are out there at the start of the practice. But what I'm saying,
My goodness.
but what I'm saying is, this league is about stars.
Yes.
It's about great players.
It
and
is.
in that Western Conference, you're seeing how significant that is. And if I'm Kawhi Leonard, if I'm focused on winning, if I'm going to the West, I better be doing it with another player of that caliber. I'm not going to the Clippers and deciding I'm going to try and win this thing because Doc Rivers is my coach.
Well, the Clippers situation is fluid because they have 2 max spots. And they could get another guy. Everybody wants to play in Southern California. Tibbs knows that. But if he goes in right now with LeBron James, and they have one more slot I think they can fill. I'm not for sure.
They do.
I have to ask the cap guys.
No, they do. They have 2 spots.
You're right.
And you can get a Kemba Walker. You can convince a Kyrie Irving to come to L.A. Then you have your next super team.
Wherever Kawhi goes, and if he stays in Toronto, they're going to win big. If you look at his winning percentage as a starter in this league, he's won 73% of his games. So wherever he goes, he's going to win. Can he win a championship? I think in the West, you need more than one. You probably need 3. To knock off Golden State, you need at least 3 guys.
Of course.
Okay, let's actually talk about the other side of that series because the Bucks lose this one. Game 6 got away from them after taking a 15-point lead in the third quarter. The Raptors took advantage of cold Bucks shooting to go on a 26-3 run, taking control of the game in the series as the Bucks were sent home after having the best record in the NBA in the regular season. So, kind of feels like you got to start with Giannis here, but let's get the camera on my friend Mike Greenberg here because he's very upset about everything that he saw.
I'm sorry. I was just having a flashback to 5 men looking completely panicked and discombobulated, throwing the ball frantically around the perimeter and then hoisting up a terrible 3 contested with 1 second left on a shot clock, which seems to be the offensive game plan of the Milwaukee Bucks. The last 16 minutes of that game, in which they got a 15-point lead with something like 4 minutes left in the third quarter. And from that moment forward, I don't know that I've ever seen a team look less able to close out a big win on the road than they did. They looked panicked and totally out of control to me. This is a team with a guy who some people say is the best player in the sport and a guy who some people say is going to be the coach of the year. Tibbs, what happened?
Well, I think the big thing is making shots. I thought you have to give Toronto a lot of credit for their defense. They loaded up on them, they double-teamed them, and I think Game 5 was the swing game. So they couldn't hit threes in that game. And I give Toronto a lot of credit for the way they helped and they recovered and challenged those shots at the three-point line. The pressure of that moment of going to the finals is probably different for Milwaukee than it was for Toronto. Toronto had Kawhi, they had Danny Green, they have Gasol, who's been in a lot of big games, they have Kyle, who's been in a lot of big games. Milwaukee hasn't been there yet. There's a lot of pressure in those moments. I think that will come. When you look at the progression of Giannis, for a 24-year-old to do the things that he's done and to watch his growth and to see who he is, I give Milwaukee a lot of credit. They didn't make shots. When you look at Game 5 was a very, very close game.
I'm not talking about Game 5, though. I'm talking about on the road, a 15-point lead in the third quarter of a game that you absolutely have in your control. And it wasn't they didn't make shots. They didn't get one good look at the basket. They didn't look like they had any idea how they wanted to try. Do they run a play? I understand that they just run pace and space, which is a new basketball phrase for we don't run an offense. But do they have a single play? Is there literally one play they can run that all 5 guys are going to go to a particular place on the floor, the ball is going to move, and the objective is to get a good shot at the basket?
Well, I think that's will be part of their growth to understand. Like, I think after a series, you go back through the playoffs, you look at the things you did well, the things you didn't do well, and then you'll add on to what you think you need to work on. So I think some of those questions will be answered. But to think about this team last year, they were a 7 seed. They lost in 7 games to Boston. Actually played very well in that series. They made a major step this year. And when your best player is 24 years old and Giannis's impact on winning has been huge. And again, you have to give Kawhi a lot of credit. When they moved Kawhi onto Giannis, that created problems. But then also building walls and double teaming him and getting the ball out of his hands, that made it difficult for them. So I think to answer your question, maybe they do have to add more offense to what they're doing. But also the thing that made them so successful all season long was the way they played. And so maybe they have to look at the playoffs and say, okay, if we add this to what we're doing, that'll make it better. But Giannis, his growth and his impact on winning is special.
So to your point that you made earlier about the Bucks not having that experience in the playoffs, late game management from the coaching standpoint, it felt like if maybe Budenholzer had just called a timeout to calm him down a little bit, some of those moments, it would have been better.
Well, you just heard from one of the best coaches in the profession, right? And he's not going to be critical of Mike Budenholzer. I'm just a young assistant coach. So I'm going to take what he should have said and really put it into perspective.
Please do.
In Game 5, he panicked. Okay, he changed his whole starting lineup. You bring in Brogdon, you take out Mirotic from the starting lineup, and then now Chris Middleton is in a difficult situation because now he only gets 9 shots. Why? Because Malcolm Brogdon is a guy who shoots the basketball. So I think he messed up in that perspective. But in Game 6, he was up 15 points 2 times in the second half, and he took Giannis out of the game. I'm not taking Giannis out of the game till I'm up 30, Coach. This is my Game 7. Okay, I have to get this game back to Milwaukee, and by any means necessary, if I have to play Giannis 48 minutes, I'm going to do it.
What do you think of that?
Well, a couple things. Brogdon started a good chunk of the season prior to getting hurt. So obviously he was going back to him because of the success that they had with him. So you have to factor that into it. The point about keeping Giannis on the floor, that's something that probably they have to look at. Particularly when you're on the road, your margin of error is a lot smaller. When he was off the floor, it made a big difference. So, but those are, Mike Budenholzer is a great coach. And the season they had was terrific. I think sometimes we look at whoever loses a series and we say, oh, this guy was out-coached. No, it's a make or miss league. I mean, you take a look at, when we talk about how great things are for Toronto, well, Philadelphia easily could have been in the conference finals, and they could easily be in the finals.
Yeah,
so to your point, I'm just saying that it's a lot harder than it looks, and then you also have a limit as to how many timeouts you can call.
Oh, of course.
And you're saving your timeouts too.
Crucial
for the end of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, but I mean, the point, DJ and I are on the same side on this. This is your whole season.
I see what you guys are doing.
But it's the whole.
No, we're not
point
ganging
is,
up on you.
what are you saving them for?
I'm with you, Tim.
Like, this is it.
But
I really did. I agree.
Yeah.
He coached that game as though losing didn't mean their season was over. I don't care how few timeouts you have. You can't save them for the end of the game. I understand that it wound up being a 3-point game, but that game got completely away from them. Yeah. They wound up playing the entire fourth quarter from behind when they had a 15-point lead.
And it's a fair point, but let me say this. So with Kawhi, big game experience.
Yeah.
And successful big game experience.
It means
championship.
A lot. It means a lot.
It means a lot.
It does.
And there's steps that you have to go through to understand that.
All right, I've got to do some other stuff here. We're going to come back to this. We'll continue to gang up on Tibbs throughout the morning here. We're looking forward to that. But I got a couple of football notes I want to get in for you here on this Memorial Day as well. And they sort of start with that guy. That's Le'Veon Bell. We all know he sat out all of last year in order to enter free agency healthy and get the kind of contract he believed he deserved. And that got our Dan Graziano thinking about other NFL players who might mimic Bell in the next few years and force a team's hand by sitting out. In his article, he talked about Jadeveon Clowney, Melvin Gordon, Michael Thomas, among others. And so for this, let's bring in our general manager. It's Mike Tannenbaum. We're delighted to see this morning. Mike, among the current players looking at the situations mentioned in that article or just around the league, who do you think is a player most likely to pull a Le'Veon, if you will, and possibly sit out some time?
Yeah, I agree. Of all the players you mentioned in that article, I would say Michael Thomas, wide receiver from the New Orleans Saints, because at the end of the year, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent, as well as Drew Brees. And obviously, they can't let Drew Brees go, presumably, if Brees plays next year. So if they have to franchise Drew Brees, Michael Thomas is going to be an unrestricted free agent, not tagged. And I could see him being well north of $20 million a year. And obviously, New Orleans can't let him go if Brees is still there. So I think of all the players that could do what Le'Veon Bell did a year ago, to me would be Michael Thomas.
You know, it's interesting. This conversation came up here on our set off the air the other day, and Jalen Rose was telling me that he's been talking for a while on Jalen and Jacoby about the possibility that Zeke Elliott would be the next guy in that situation. And there are similarities with Zeke Elliott and Le'Veon Bell. Maybe the franchise has some hesitation about giving them a long-term contract based on some off-the-field things and that type of thing. Is Ezekiel Elliott a player who could be in that circumstance?
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point, because when you look at what he's done for their offense, and in particular Dak Prescott has been a lot more productive as a play-action passer. The offense really runs through Elliott. He sets up their passing game. So I agree with that in terms of his value to that team. Their one-loss record, their production and offense is all noticeably better when Zeke's playing. So I think he has a lot of leverage, and the Cowboy offense really starts with him.
Yeah, and if you're Dallas, if you don't want to commit to him long term, he's got 2 more years left under their control, and then they can franchise him. And at that point, that's when running backs start running into that wall traditionally, and he has a lot of mileage on him. So I see that being a very similar circumstance to what we saw with Le'Veon in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great point. And what they could do is they have 3 more years to find his replacement. It's a little bit like with Le'Veon Bell. James Conner was a guy they drafted, they developed. And then when Bell moved on, they feel much better about James Conner. So likewise, they do control Elliott for a number of years, and then they could franchise him. So if I'm Dallas, it buys me time to try to get his replacement. And let's see if maybe he turns the corner in terms of being more reliable off the field, because we're talking about so much money here, but he's such a valuable player to that offense.
Well done, Mike. We'll check back with you a little later.